This global pandemic continues to wreak havoc. Close to 4,000 people have died in the United States alone just over the past 2 days. Governments around the world are putting together massive financial packages to keep their economies afloat, with a possible vaccine still a long way off. The challenge for countries which have been able to suppress the virus so far is how they now manage this over the next 18 months before that vaccine is possibly developed. So here are today's key developments. Eligible workers in Australia will soon get $1,500 fortnightly payments for 6 months after the federal government's $130 billion wage subsidy scheme passed Parliament. Payments will be received by employers in the first week of May, backdated from March 30. The number of confirmed virus cases has now passed through 6,000 in Australia. The US is on track for another huge daily number of deaths. It sits around 1,800 at the moment, with a couple of hours to go. Across the US, the death toll is more than 14,600. The UK daily toll hit a high of 938 as the number of victims from the pandemic passed 7,000. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is sitting up in his hospital bed at least and responding to treatment. The World Health Organization has cautioned countries against lowering their guard ahead of the Easter weekend, warning that the progress that Europe had made so far was extremely fragile. And the World Trade Organization says that global economic growth is expected to plummet by up to a third in 2020. The forecast suggests goods trade will shrink more steeply this year than in the global financial crisis a decade ago. Okay, we're going to get into a couple of those issues in more detail now, but before we do, I'll just mention that the Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk should be stepping up for a media conference in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, and we'll take a listen to what she's got to say, as well as the Tasmanian Premier Peter Gutwein. He's been holding a media conference about 9:15. It's Australian Eastern Standard Time now, each morning for the past couple of weeks, and we'll take a listen to what he has to say as well. So the largest single economic bailout package in Australia's history has passed federal parliament overnight, with $130 billion JobKeeper scheme becoming law. The scheme will pay employers $1,500 per fortnight for each worker they keep on the payroll during this coronavirus shutdown. Political reporter Melissa Clark joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Mel, g'day. So Parliament's out just for one day, but it was a big day, huh?
It was a very expensive day too. $130 billion worth of spending to be rolled out in the next 6 months, ticked off in just one day of sitting. We certainly haven't seen anything like it before. It had a fairly straightforward passage through Parliament. Labor and the Greens suggested various amendments, none of which were successful. But nonetheless, there was agreement to support the package in order to get this money out the door and heading towards workers and businesses. The Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, was certainly well aware of the historic nature of this kind of spending, and certainly not the sort of big government spending the coalition had anticipated when it came into government, but nonetheless saying this will be necessary to stave off mass unemployment. And Josh Frydenberg has made it clear that he thinks that this could help around 750,000 Australian businesses.
We know that already more than 730,000 businesses have registered with the Australian Tax Office their interest in taking up the JobKeeper payment. That's 730,000 businesses employing millions of Australians. They'll be big and small. They'll be sole traders. Indeed, they'll be not-for-profits who already have also registered their interest. This is a very broad-based scheme of support. And I think for many Australians, this will be the economic lifeline that they were looking for.
So Mel, just take us through the timing of this package now. How quickly will the money be handed out?
Well, the money will start to roll out to businesses at the beginning of May. So there's still a couple of weeks to go before businesses actually start to receive that funding. However, it will be backdated to the end of March. Now, the government has advised if businesses might struggle to keep money going through the payroll in the next couple of weeks until that money comes through, that they should speak to their bank and their lending institution. Given that that money is guaranteed to come from the federal government, they've said that there should be lines of credit forthcoming from banks in scenarios where they just need a bit of help with cash flow over the coming weeks. Having said that, there is still some question about what position this will leave some casual workers in and temporary migrant workers as well. This doesn't apply to casuals who've been with their employer for less than 12 months. This is something the Labor Party was trying to get amended in Parliament unsuccessfully, as well as extending it to temporary people with temporary visas because they're meant to be able to support themselves if their work doesn't follow through. But of course, many are finding that difficult at this particular time. Anthony Albanese has spoken this morning saying he still wants to expand it because Australia has a responsibility, as he sees it, to look after those temporary workers and casual workers who aren't covered by the scheme.
If people can go home and they're temporary visa holders, they should. The fact is many of them can't. There are flights, there are border closures have occurred, including, of course, here in Australia, we effectively have ground our international airline industry. So how can people go home? And then if they don't have work and they don't have any money to survive, where do they sleep? How do they eat? How do they survive on a day-to-day basis?
Anthony Albanese speaking there. And Mel, the National Cabinet meets again today. So this is the Prime Minister, the State Premiers and the Territory Chief Ministers. What's on the agenda for them today?
Look, their focus today is very much on education, in particular trying to figure out how to manage Year 12 students this year. We know that the National Cabinet has already ruled out the idea of a Year 13 or a mass repeat of Year 12. It's a matter of trying to juggle around the different requirements, be it HSC or VCE or other school leaving programs, about how to manage exams and assessments, but also for universities to figure out the best way to assess entrants coming into universities. Do there need to be adjustments to the ATAR university entrance rankings? We've heard some universities talk about the idea of assessing Year 11 results instead of Year 12 results when they consider applications for tertiary places. So these are the things that the state and Commonwealth leaders are going to be considering. And further down the high school and primary school levels, how to manage Term 3, given that a number of jurisdictions have already declared that for Term 2 it's a case of if you can learn from home, you need to learn from home. But how to manage Term 3 when potentially some schools might look at having more students on campus, others might need to still remain in different scenarios. So education very much the priority for National Cabinet today.
Now, Mel, Australia has been comparatively successful at suppressing the spread of coronavirus. There's been 51 deaths here in Australia, which is terrible, and there are more than 6,000 cases, but it is faring well compared to other countries. What's the discussion at the moment about how soon different sectors of the economy might start opening up once again?
This is an interesting one because there's obviously certainly a lot of desire to try and get back to normal life as soon as possible, not just from every Australian under these conditions, but also from the federal government and state governments that want to see the economy running where possible, just to try and make sure the impact on people's livelihoods isn't too great. But trying to assess that is very difficult. We know that Commonwealth public health officials are really starting to drill down into local data that we have now. So at the moment, decisions have been made based on the overseas experiences of how COVID-19 spreads in a community, and that's had to inform decision making. Now there have been cases locally. They're able to use data about how this virus is spreading in Australia, and we've heard from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer this morning, Dr. Coatsworth, that this local data that they are really grappling with over the next couple of days will give them a better sense of how to apply that to Australia, what the forward expectations might be for Australia. And it's only then that they can start thinking about when the easing of these kind of social restrictions might be able to come into place. So they're definitely warning, don't get ahead of the curve at the moment. They will be thinking about how to step out of this process, but they're not even going to be looking at that for a couple of weeks yet till they have a better sense of how COVID-19 behaves here in Australia.
And Mel, just on a personal note, it's great to have you back on the news channel. The viewers might remember Mel was one of the original crew, I think, back 10 years ago. We haven't seen you for quite some time, but great to have you back again.
Good to be back with the old crew with you, Joe. Thank you.
Cheers, Mel. Now, turning back to the situation with the coronavirus spread here in Australia. So this morning we've had the death of a South Australian man from coronavirus confirmed, and this has taken the national death toll to 51. Reporter Natasha Kalios joins us now from Adelaide. So Natasha, SA Health has released a bit of information about this morning. Take us through it.
Joe, so we've had 3 deaths now, all reported this week. The third death is a 76-year-old man from regional South Australia. That's the first case, the first death rather, reported from regional SA. He was infected in the Barossa Valley region, but it is not yet known how he contracted coronavirus. Earlier this week, we had a 62-year-old woman. She had been a passenger on the Ruby Princess cruise ship, and we had a 75-year-old man. Now, SA Health say that there are 420 coronavirus cases in South Australia. 120 have recovered, and there are several still in intensive care.
Yeah. And Natasha was just discussing with Melissa Clark the talk of the possible easing back of shutdowns. What's the discussion around that in South Australia?
Yeah, so it had been reported that South Australia, if you like, may be a guinea pig state to monitor the impact of slowly easing those restrictions. However, this morning, South Australian Premier Stephen Marshall was very quick to play that down. He said it's something they're not even considering at this stage.
OK, Natasha Kalios reporting there from Adelaide. OK, so let's go around the states now. So here in Australia, there are now 39 new coronavirus infections in New South Wales, taking the state's total to 2,773. It comes as detectives start interviewing key witnesses on the Ruby Princess cruise ship, the ship at the centre of a COVID-19 criminal inquiry. Reporter Lara Hyams joins us now from Sydney. Lara, good morning. So what's the latest on the Ruby Princess?
Well, Joe, this story about this ship which docked in Sydney is now in the hands of New South Wales Police. Now, the reason why this is so pivotal to the coronavirus outbreak bigger narrative is because it's connected to 600 confirmed cases of coronavirus and tragically 15 deaths as well. Now, at the heart of this investigation, New South Wales Police will be looking to ascertain exactly who knew what and what department, if any, was culpable in allowing this ship to dock into Sydney waters. Of course, when this ship did dock, it did have thousands of passengers disembark, some of them with coronavirus, and also with that decision to allow those passengers to disembark, they also infected other people, which sent the New South Wales tally for coronavirus cases skyrocketing. Now, we have had some news today that has come out from the New South Wales Police Commissioner. They said as part of the investigation, there have been 30 detectives which have gone on board the ship overnight as part of their investigation to scour for evidence and have a look exactly what they could find. Previously to that, what has prefaced that is that overnight we also have confirmation from Australian Border Force saying that there was a conversation that took place with the New South Wales Ports Authority. Now, that is actually within a state jurisdiction, and with that confirmation, with that conversation, it appears that the Ports Authority advised Border Force that there were some concerns with some of the passengers involved in relation to their health. And then on the sidelines, parallel to that, Border Force said that there had been some conversations with New South Wales Health, which said that they were cleared to do so, and that may have influenced ultimately a decision that the passengers were safe to disembark. But this morning, what has been quite powerful is that we've heard from Mick Fuller, who said that they have actually seized a black box which has been on the ship.
Ships have a black box very similar to that of international planes, and that and other evidence has been seized for further investigation, and that is just sort of part one of the investigation. I can confirm there's still over 1,000 crew members on the ship. We're working closely with Carnival. Around 3/4 at this stage have said they want to remain on the ship.
Now, Lara, people might be surprised to hear that there was a flight from Wuhan that arrived in Sydney overnight. Talk us through what happened there.
Well, the reason why that was allowed to happen is because some of the travel restrictions that had been placed on Wuhan by the Chinese government have now lifted. Of course, that also applies to airports and some of the transportation hubs. Now, a plane has arrived in Sydney overnight, and that has been carrying 90 tonnes of medical supplies, so masks, guns and also gowns and also ventilators, which have been put back into the medical supply chain, and that is likely to be welcome news by the medical fraternity.